Are you ready?
I met a lot of you this
You're
Saturday
nervous.
at the exhibition, and I just want to say I think everything you're doing is really great. I was talking to Luke yesterday about, I went to Princeton and declared my major in molecular biology, and then switched to religion. So I have dual interests in both areas, and this is really reigniting my interest in the science side. So thanks.
Thank you. Hi guys, so my name is Bridgette Harrison, and
Hi, Bridget.
what is this, AA? Okay.
That was last week.
Okay, so the title of my paper is Poverty Impedes Cognitive Brain Function, or in more simpler terms, Gabby hit the thing. Thank you. No, you didn't.
You can do it, Gabby.
Could living in impoverished conditions limit your brain function? So before we start, I want to go on and say what's going on in their brains at this moment. So first, so there's a person living in impoverished conditions. So what their main focus on is money, shelter, and food. And so their brain isn't functioning properly because they're not worrying, or they're only worrying about mainly these three things. Versus someone who's not living in poverty can be thinking about the same food, same shelter, same money, but they can also be thinking about things like cancer cures, world peace, and How I Met Your Mother facts. So someone who is not living in poverty is not distracted by these basic necessities, and so their brain isn't thinking about other things. Okay. So the purpose of this experiment was to test how poverty affects the cognitive functions of these people. So their main objective was to find a way to help these people improve their cognitive function. So some things to know before we start. One of the tests they run is called the Raven's test. Basically, it just tests your general intelligence. Your cognitive function, it's your working memory, it's your language processing, it's your thoughts. This is how you think. And then poverty is defined in this paper is $70,000 to $20,000 per year. Although that is plenty enough to sustain a healthy lifestyle, this is what the target group that this article focused on. So the first study they did was separated into 4 different experiments. It was completed in a mall in New Jersey, actually. And what they did was, one more time. They had a group of people and they split them into the rich and the poor by their effective income. Your effective income is done by taking the square root of how many people in your house. So if you have 4 people in a family, and so you take the square root, you have 2, and say you make $20,000 a year, take $20,000 divided by 2, and $10,000 is your effective household income. So that was how they defined the rich and the poor. Okay, keep going. So the first experiment they did, they had 4 hypothetical situations describing financial problems they may experience. So it was something like, your car is broken down and needs to be fixed. Are you going to pay it in full, take out a loan, or are you going to forgo the expense and hope for the best? And while they were thinking about these situations, they asked them to take 2 computer tests, the Raven's progressive matrices and the spatial compatibility test. So the spatial compatibility test tests your cognitive function, and your Raven's test tests your general intelligence. Okay. Oh, yeah?
What differentiates the Raven's test from something like an IQ test?
An IQ test? Oh, it's very, very similar. The IQ test is basically the same as the Raven's test. It's just a little bit more specific. Yeah. Okay. So here are the results. So before we go into this, I just want to explain. So what they would do is you see there's the rich and the poor, but then there's 2 types of questions they would ask at the beginning. So when they would ask, okay, your car needs to be fixed, the easy group would get asked, it only costs $150 to get your car fixed. The hard group would be asked, it costs $1,500 to get your car fixed. What are you going to do? And the purpose was that while they were taking this test, they were thinking about their own financial situations and what they would do personally. So what you can see from the Raven's test over here is that for the easy questions, both the rich and the poor did about the same. And then when it comes to the hard questions, you can see that the poor did significantly worse on the test, on both tests, on the cognitive test and the Raven's test, than they did when they were asked an easy question. Meaning that when they're thinking about financial situations, their brain isn't functioning to its full capacity. Okay. Next slide. So the second test, essentially to rule out any math anxiety they might have with the numbers, they did the same situation. Keep going. Keep going. One more. But they didn't have any big scary numbers. And essentially there was no correlation, it made no impact on the results, essentially saying that the results they got weren't because people were scared of the number values of the quantities of money. Okay, next one. So the third experiment was the same as the first one, still asked about, you need to get your car fixed, but now for every right question they answered on this test, they got an additional 25 cents. So essentially right question equals money. So they wanted to see if they have an incentive to do well, if that then improves their cognitive function. But again, as you can see, it's the same as the first experiment, right? There's the cognitive control is worse when they're asked the hard questions, and the same for the Ravens test. Yes?
Why did they think reward would affect the results?
Well, they wanted to see if now they have real motive to do well, if that changes their cognitive function, or if it's just regardless of the situation.
So is cognitive function a result of motive, or is it affected by motive? That's what you're asking. That's what they're asking?
Yeah. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, makes sense. Okay, so the fourth experiment, same questions as in 1 through 3 with, okay, your car needs to be fixed. The difference was now that they, go back. Thank you. Now that they responded to the question before taking the test. So they wanted to see if the fact that they'd be preoccupied worrying about answering this question before taking the test and see how, if answering the question first affected the results. Okay. But again, as you can see, they did significantly worse when asked the hard questions than the easy, meaning that their data was congruent all the way through. Okay. So the second study they did was it was a field study. They went out to sugarcane farmers in India, and did these tests before and after their harvest. Because before their harvest, they didn't get paid, and after the harvest, they were paid. So sugarcane farmers have one crop, one harvest per year. So their entire annual salary has to be made in one harvest. So we wanted to see how their cognitive function is before the harvest and after the harvest. Okay, next slide. Okay, one more time. Okay, so the results. If you focus on, here, come over here. It's easy. So what they did was they broke it down. You have people, this column here is people who were before the harvest, farmers before the harvest. And over here is farmers who had harvested but hadn't gotten their money yet. So same type of people. And what you can see here, so they have people who were more likely to pawn their belongings. They have people who had outstanding loans and people who had trouble paying ordinary bills in the past 15 days. So if we focus in on the top one here, belongings pawned, if you can see that for this number here, a 0 is a no and a 1 is a yes. So of the group, how many people were pawning their items? It's 0.566, meaning that most people, more than half, did pawn items in the last 15 days. And then if you go to the next one. So these were the results. They did the same tests as before. They just did a Stroop test instead of the spatial partial test because it has, and they redid it so that it works for people with lower literacy rates. And what you can see here, so for the Ravens test before the harvest, their accuracy was much lower than after the harvest. For the cognitive control, this is reaction time. So their response time was much higher before the harvest than after the harvest. And their cognitive control, the number of errors they made was much higher before the harvest than after the harvest. So these results were the same as with the other experiments' results. Okay, so what does this all mean? Fine. So living in impoverished conditions may correlate to lower cognitive functions. And another interesting thing that they mentioned in this article was that the financial burdens caused by poverty affects your brain as much as losing a full night of sleep. So imagine if you didn't sleep for a full night. That's what these people go through every day. And you can wake up and you're groggy and you can't think things through properly. This is how they may feel every day. Okay, so essentially, no money equals no thoughts. Okay. Thank you to Mr. D, Dr. Celia, of IRT, my parents for coming, and you guys for watching. Anyone have any questions? So they looked at stress and malnutrition and malnutrition that may have caused stress, but found that that had no real correlation to this, although it is a factor in the poverty. It didn't affect their cognitive control. Yeah.
Do you know if they compared these results of cognitive function based on financial stress to like other forms of stress and how those affected test results?
They did, but they found that the one that had the most impact was the financial stress, and that was why the focus of the study was on the financial stress. Yeah.
Did they find that like a person in cognitive function like tapered off to a point sort of plateau, or would it continue to increase as stress increased?
Don't know. This study only focused on like solids. They didn't continue looking at the people, but interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
First, I want to just point out a couple things. If you go to the previous slide. Okay, so no money doesn't equal no
No.
thoughts, right?
Obviously, no, that's not what I mean. I just mean that like the lack of money correlates to the lower cognitive function.
Right, and it might not even be lower cognitive function. What it might be is lower cognitive function applied to a certain area.
Right.
So I just wanted to make that clear. Did they do anything to differentiate between, so we're saying stress, and what we mean is like thoughts associated with a life of poverty. So, for example, you gave the example of like having to fix your car, right? But I don't think stress and thoughts of having to fix your car are the same thing. I think those are two different.
It's the stress caused by the fact that you're sitting there going, I need to fix my car, right? I need to get to work every day, and my car is broken. I can't get to work.
Right.
That means that I can't get the money I need to support my family, support my lifestyle. So it's saying that they're finding the correlation between that as relating the struggle of not being able to get your car or whatever, not being able to pay things with. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I guess, okay, so here's the difference. So if the thoughts of having to fix your car are causing stress, which is causing you to not be able to direct your brain at a certain problem, then like a drug like an anxiolytic should reduce, or should allow you to think or completely dedicate yourself to a task, right?
Yeah.
You with me? You guys with me? If you're like, oh my God, I can't pay for my car, what's 3 + 3? If it's like you're just splitting your attention, then a drug that stopped anxiety shouldn't help there. But if you're like, oh my God, I have to pay for my car, I'm worried, and now I can't think about what 3 + 3 is, then a drug should allow you to solve 3 + 3 with equal ease as everybody
I don't
else.
see your difference between the first scenario and your second.
Okay, imagine you have like 10 things you can think of at one time, right?
Different parts of the brain, right?
Right. So I'm saying in one scenario, you're thinking of you're using like half your brain to think of how to get to school in the morning, and the other half of your brain you're solving your math problems with. In the second scenario, you're using like 2 parts of your brain to figure out how to get to school, but that 2 parts is causing you stress. That stress is, and the stress itself, which is like a hormone basically, is causing you not to think as well. Georgia.
I was just wondering if they did anything that had to do with if you were born into an impoverished family, so you're not really the one that's worrying about the financial stress, it's more your parents, if that still affected your function, just like growing up poor with less money.
Right now, that's a really good question. I mean, this study only talked about the people interviewed them all, but that would be really interesting to see. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because you said that they were collected, from this model. Do you have the information about like sample size and stuff?
Yeah, it was like 1,000 people. It was the sample size of these things, and then they separated them, so there was about 300 people per like easy question group, hard question group, rich, poor. Yeah, Mr. Maxwell, your question.
Yeah, I think this study establishes a correlation pretty well, but I'm not sure which way the causality works, because I could imagine that impoverished condition leads to lower function. I could see that, but I could also see the reverse, that lower function leads to lower ability to command more wages. How did they do anything to tease those two?
No, so they talked about, in the article about how it affects, what you do in the workplace and things, but I don't necessarily know, I mean, it doesn't, I don't know whether the people here, like, had everything and lost it, or if they had only, like, lived in these situations, like, their whole life, so I don't know. I guess that would factor into it as well.
I think that was the purpose of having them give some of the people a difficult, burdensome kind of question and some a fairly easy one, because it's the same financial demographic, but different amounts of stresses related to it.
It would be dose dependent. If what he's saying is right, then it would be dose dependent. Like the difficulty of the problem should correlate too.
And it did.
And it did not, correct? Right? The first study, when they gave the hard number versus the easy number.
Right. The hard number, the cognitive function, people who asked the hard question was significantly lower than the easier question.
So it was dose dependent.
Yeah.
So because it's
See what I mean?
different,
So it's much lower
implies that
than when asked the easy question.
It's not causation for sure,
that
but
implies-
it hints at causation, yeah. G, can you talk louder, bro?
What happened in India, the experiment what they did in India kind of supports the chain of causality that Bridgette is talking about, right? That before they harvest they were poor, and then afterwards they kind of monetary concerns kind of went away for the time being. And they found that beforehand, when they didn't have as much money, they weren't able to process as much, so their cognitive function went down, as opposed to after the harvest when they had more money. So I think that helps to explain that helps to draw a firmer connection between the fact that having less wealth relates to not as strong cognitive function.
I don't think that was a
That was
question.
not a question, right? It was a statement, right?
It was a discussion.
Okay.
Gaurav was discussing.
I think that's a really good point, because you're saying it's the same population, right, is being tested twice when they're essentially in a poor condition and
Right.
essentially in a wealthy condition, and they indeed improve.
Any other questions?
Did they do anything other than money situations to induce stress? Or like,
They talked about everyday stress, so malnutrition and stuff like that, but none of those stresses they found were as significant on the brain as the financial stress.
I'm just saying, I'd be interested to see something where I was like, if you were dealing with like cancer or something, if that would impede your cognitive function, because like that's something that seemed really, really stressful. I don't know.
There's also different types of stress, right?
Yeah.
There's stress that's caused by a paralysis situation, like, I don't know, being diagnosed with cancer, and there's ones where you're perpetually, every day, if these people, I guess it also depends on whether these people were successful and fell into hard times and are now in this situation, or if they were continuous, right? Because if they were continuous and they've been like this for a much longer time, I think the stress would be more significant, and the loss of cognitive function would be more significant, because the stress would feel has been a longer period of time. And when you have cancer,
Yeah, yeah.
that's, exactly.
depends.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be more
It
specific.
could also be an interesting development to see, because the stress that was induced here is not just stress, but it's also sort of a problem-solving situation, where they were both worried about something and they had to basically try to find a solution while solving
It's
these other
possible
problems.
that, well, focusing and thinking are two different things.
Development from here would
Right,
be
so those are in two different parts of the brain.
induce those types of
But
psychological
I don't know.
burdens
It's a good
to see
question.
how they had
I don't know the exact answer to that.
Right, because I mean, these people are going through everyday life stress as well as financial stress, I think, so that might
Thanks.
also compound it.
Claire, who's up next?
Avery Vella is next.
I had a panic attack for a second.
All right. Guys, thank you everybody for coming. Be safe at prom for those of you that are going. And I'll see you guys next week. Bridge, you did good.